The first thing the water takes is the light. Before it reaches the doors, before it fills the streets, before anyone understands what is happening, a flash flood tearing into a city at night knocks out the power, and the world goes black. And in that darkness, a flood becomes something far worse than a flood. In daylight, rising water is at least visible. A threat you can see and measure and flee. A brown tide you can watch climb the steps and decide, while there is still time, to get out. In complete darkness, it is none of those things. It is invisible. You cannot see how high it is, or how fast it is rising, or which way leads to higher ground, and which way leads down into deeper water. You hear it, a roar in the black, and you feel it, cold around your ankles and then your knees, but you cannot see it, and a rising flood you cannot see is not a hazard to be navigated, but an ambush closing in from every side at once. This is the particular horror at the heart of the disaster we are talking about, a flash flood that swallowed a city in complete darkness. And it is made immeasurably worse by the fact that, for a flood like this, arriving this fast in the dead of night, the warning that might have gotten people out in time effectively did not exist, or came too late, or never reached the people who needed it. The water rose in the dark, and no one told them to run. Imagine being one of the people it catches. A man is driving home late, the rain hammering his windshield so hard the wipers cannot keep up, the road ahead a blur of red taillights and black water. He comes to an underpass, the kind he has driven through 1,000 times, and there are cars ahead of him, so he follows them down into it, and only when he is already at the bottom does he realize the water there is deeper than it looked. Rising fast, lapping at his doors. He tries to reverse, but the cars behind have followed him down and there is nowhere to go. And then the engine coughs and dies, and the headlights flicker and go out, and he is sitting in the dark in a metal box with water rising around the windows and the doors held shut by the pressure of the flood outside. He was not warned. No alert told him that this underpass, tonight, would become a trap. He simply drove into it in the rain, following the car in front the way anyone would. And now he is in the dark with the water coming up, and there was no voice, no siren, no message, nothing to tell him not to take the low road tonight. Multiply that man by the drivers in the other cars, by the passengers in the subway below, by the families in the flooding basements, by everyone caught in the dark low places of a city that no one warned in time. And you have the human reality of this disaster. Thousands of people each meeting the water alone, in the black, without the one thing that might have saved them, which was simply to have been told, in time, to stay away. This is a story about that specific combination, the flash flood, the darkness, and the missing warning. Because each one alone is dangerous, and the three of them together are catastrophic. And it is a story that keeps repeating across China and across the world, this exact pattern. A sudden wall of water arriving faster than anyone expected, often at night, often after the power has failed. Into cities and towns where the systems meant to warn people either did not work or did not reach them in time. To understand why this keeps happening and why it is so lethal, you have to understand what a flash flood actually is, why darkness turns it from a disaster into a massacre, and why, in an age of smartphones and sensors and so-called smart cities, a person standing in a flooding street in the dark can still, somehow, have no one telling them that death is rising around their feet. Start with the flood itself, because a flash flood is a fundamentally different creature from the floods most people picture. When people imagine a flood, they usually imagine a slow one, a river swelling over days, the water creeping up inch by inch as the rains continue, giving people time to sandbag, to evacuate, to move their belongings upstairs. A disaster that unfolds slowly enough to be seen coming. A flash flood is the opposite. It is flooding that arrives suddenly and violently, in minutes to hours rather than days, when an enormous amount of rain falls in a very short time over an area that cannot absorb or drain it fast enough. In a city, this is especially vicious because a city is largely paved. Its ground sealed under concrete and asphalt that cannot soak up any water at all, so that nearly all the rain that falls has to run off across the surface and into the drains. And when the rain falls faster than the drains can carry it away, which in an extreme downpour it easily can, the water has nowhere to go but up, pooling in the streets, filling the low places, rising with terrifying speed. A flash flood does not creep. It surges. It can turn a dry street into a chest-deep river in minutes, send a wall of water down an urban canyon, fill an underpass or a tunnel or a basement almost instantly, and it gives its victims not days or hours, but sometimes only minutes to react, which is precisely why warning matters so much and why its absence is so deadly. Now add the darkness, because the darkness transforms the flash flood from a fast disaster into an almost inescapable one. There are two reasons a flash flood so often comes with darkness, and they compound each other. The first is simply timing, that many of these events happen at night, when a slow building storm finally breaks in the small hours, catching a city asleep. People in their beds unaware that the water is already in the streets below. The second is that the flood itself creates the darkness, because rising water reaches electrical infrastructure, substations and lines and underground systems, and knocks out the power, so that even a flood that begins in the evening quickly plunges its surroundings into blackness. And in that blackness, every one of the things that might save a person is stripped away. You cannot see the water rising, so you cannot judge how much time you have. You cannot see the depth, so you cannot know whether the street ahead is passable or a drowning trap. You cannot see the exits, the stairs, the high ground, the route to safety, so you move blind, guessing, feeling your way through water that is getting deeper as you go. You cannot see the dangers hidden in the flood, the open drains, the submerged obstacles, the downed live wires. The darkness takes away sight at the exact moment sight is the difference between life and death, and it turns the flood into an ambush, an enemy that surrounds people who cannot see it coming and cannot see the way out. And nowhere is that darkness more lethal than in the underground and enclosed spaces that modern cities are full of, because these become death traps almost instantly when a flash flood hits. Think of the underpasses and tunnels where roads dip below grade, natural low points that fill with water faster than anywhere else. Trapping vehicles whose drivers cannot see how deep the water ahead has become until they are already in it and the engine has died and the doors will not open against the pressure. Think of the subway systems, the tunnels running beneath the city, into which floodwater can pour from the streets above, filling the tunnels and the stations and the trains. Trapping passengers in cars as the water rises around them in the dark underground. Think of the basements and the underground garages and the sunken shops where people live and work and shelter, filling with water that blocks the only stairs out. In daylight, some of these traps can at least be seen and avoided. In the darkness of a flash flood with the power gone, they become invisible killers. Low places that the water finds first and fills fastest, where people are caught in enclosed spaces in the black with the water rising and no way to see the exit that might be only feet away. The most horrific tolls of these urban flash floods are so often taken in exactly these places, the tunnels and the subways and the basements, where the darkness and the water and the enclosure combine into something from which escape becomes almost impossible. To grasp how fast and how disorienting this is, you have to slow down and live inside the minutes it allows, because that is where the terror really is. A flash flood in a city does not announce itself with the slow drama of a rising river. One moment, the street is merely wet, water sheeting across the pavement, ankle deep, an inconvenience. A few minutes later, it is at the knees, then the waist. The current now strong enough to sweep a person off their feet, and the whole transformation happens in the span of a short conversation, faster than the mind can adjust to it. And when the power fails in the middle of that, the disorientation becomes total, because the landmarks a person uses to navigate vanish into black. The familiar street becomes an unrecognizable expanse of moving water. The sense of which way is out dissolves. Sound becomes the only guide, and sound in a flood is deceiving, the roar of the water seeming to come from everywhere, drowning out voices, making it impossible to tell whether help or danger lies in any direction. Cold sets in fast, sapping strength and clear thinking, and the water is never just water. It is full of debris and current and hidden hazards, so that every step in the dark is a gamble. This is the experience the darkness imposes. A person with only minutes to escape, stripped of sight, disoriented, cold, guessing at the route to safety through moving water they cannot see. And it is why the toll of these floods is so heavy, because the conditions rob people of nearly every tool they would normally use to save themselves, in the exact minutes when saving themselves is all that matters. So into this already terrible situation comes the final damning element, which is the failure of warning. And here we have to be precise and honest, because it is not that China or any modern country has literally no weather forecasting, no meteorological service, no capacity to see a storm coming. That would be false. The forecasts exist. The rain is often predicted. Warnings of a kind are frequently issued. The problem is subtler and in a way more damning, because it lies in the vast gap between a warning existing somewhere in the system and a warning actually reaching, in time and with enough force, the specific person standing in a specific dark street as the water rises around their feet. That is the gap where people die. A forecast of heavy rain issued to the public is not the same as an order to evacuate a specific neighborhood. A colored alert level posted on a website is not the same as a siren that wakes a sleeping city. A warning that a flash flood is possible somewhere in a large region is not the same as the knowledge that this street, this tunnel, this building is about to be inundated in the next 10 minutes. The warning chain has many links, from the forecast to the alert to the decision to the dissemination to the individual finally understanding that they, personally, must move right now, and a flash flood arriving in minutes in the dark can break that chain at any of its links, so that the warning, even when it technically exists, fails to become the thing that actually matters, a person getting out of the water in time. This is the phenomenon that recent disasters have exposed so brutally. When a sudden flash flood tore through a scenic area in China not long ago, killing and stranding people who had no idea it was coming, the aftermath revealed exactly this kind of breakdown. A critical failure in the chain of disaster warning, the water arriving before any effective alert could reach the people in its path. And in one of the most catastrophic urban flooding events in the country's recent history, when an almost unimaginable quantity of rain fell on a major city in a single day, the failures were not primarily failures of forecasting, because warnings of extreme rain had in fact been issued, raised to the highest levels. The failures were in what happened next, and whether those warnings translated into decisive action, whether the city was shut down, whether the subways and roads were closed, whether people were kept out of the traps before the water came. And when they were not, when life continued more or less as normal despite the warnings, the water caught people exactly where it should not have, in the tunnels and the subways and the streets, and the death toll climbed into the hundreds. The lesson of these disasters is not that no one saw the rain coming. It is that seeing the rain coming is not enough. That a warning which does not reach people with enough force and enough time and enough specificity to actually move them out of harm's way is, for all practical purposes, no warning at all. The scenes that come out of these events are almost unbearable precisely because they show the warning gap made flesh. In the Great Urban Flood, the images that seared themselves into the national memory were of people trapped in a subway train as the water rose inside the carriage, standing on the seats, then holding one another up. The water climbing toward the ceiling in the dark of the flooded tunnel, passengers messaging their families because they did not know if they would get out. There were the cars in the drowned road tunnel, dozens of them, submerged in the dark, their occupants caught in exactly the kind of low-enclosed trap that fills first and fastest. These were not people who ignored a clear order to flee. They were people going about ordinary life, riding the train home, driving through the city, in a place where the systems that should have closed the subway and sealed the tunnel and kept them out of the traps did not act in time, so that the flood found them where they never should have been, and in the more recent flash flood that swept through without effective warning. The pattern was the same in miniature, people caught unaware by water that arrived before any alert, stranded and swept away in the gap between what the sky was doing and what anyone had told them. Every one of these scenes is a portrait of the same failure. The human beings at the end of the broken warning chain, meeting the water without the foreknowledge that might have carried them to safety. And it is the specificity of that horror, the trapped train, the drowned tunnel, that makes these disasters so haunting and so damning. Why is this last mile of warning so hard, so persistently, even as the technology to detect and predict storms grows ever more sophisticated? Part of the answer is the sheer speed of a flash flood, because there is sometimes simply not enough time. The gap between the moment it becomes clear that a specific place will flood catastrophically and the moment it actually does being too short for any warning system to close. Part of it is the difficulty of specificity, because it is one thing to forecast heavy rain over a region and quite another to predict that this particular underpass will fill in the next 15 minutes. And warnings that are too general wash over people who do not believe they apply to them. Part of it is the human factor, the way people who have received many warnings that came to nothing learn to discount them. The way a person asleep at night never hears the alert at all. The way even a person who gets the message may not grasp its urgency until it is too late, may finish one more task, may decide to wait and see, may make the small delay that costs them everything. And part of it, in the darkness, is that even a person who understands the danger perfectly may not be able to act on it, because they cannot see where to go, cannot find the exit, cannot judge which direction is safe. The last mile of warning is hard because it is not really about technology at all. It is about the messy, human, physical reality of getting a specific frightened person in the dark, in the water, to understand and to act in the handful of minutes they have. And that is a problem that no amount of sensors and forecasting has yet reliably solved. It is worth being concrete about what a warning that actually works would have to look like, because naming it shows how far short the reality often falls. A warning that saves people from a night flash flood cannot be a colored icon on a weather app that most people never open. It has to be loud, physical, and impossible to ignore. The kind of alert that reaches into a sleeping home and wakes the people inside. A siren that sounds across a neighborhood. A message that seizes every phone in a threatened zone with an alarm that cannot be silenced. A system that does not merely inform, but commands, that says not rain is likely, but leave this building now. And crucially, for the low traps that kill the most, the warning cannot depend on a person receiving a message and choosing to act, because in the dark and the speed there may be no time for that. It has to be automatic and physical. Barriers that drop to close a flooding underpass before cars can enter. Systems that halt and evacuate a subway the moment water threatens the tunnels. Gates and protocols that take the deadly decision out of human hands and act in the seconds available. The places that do warning best combine all of this. The forceful alert that reaches the individual and the automatic physical action that protects the trap even when no one is warned in time. The gap between that and what these drowning cities actually had. A forecast and a system somewhere and a subway still running and a tunnel still open is the exact distance between the people who lived and the people who did not, and closing it is less a matter of inventing new technology than of building the will and the systems to turn a warning into an action before the water arrives. There is a bitter irony in this, because these disasters often strike cities that have invested heavily in exactly the technology that was supposed to prevent them. The smart city systems, the flood sensors, the sophisticated monitoring, the promise that a modern, wired, data-rich city could see danger coming and protect its people. And when the flood comes anyway, and the smart systems fail to keep people out of the tunnels and the subways and the basements, it exposes the hollowness of a certain kind of technological confidence, the assumption that gathering data and building dashboards is the same as keeping people safe. It is not. A sensor that detects rising water in a tunnel is useless if that detection does not trigger an immediate, forceful, automatic action to close the tunnel and get people out. A monitoring system that shows the flood developing on a screen in a control room is useless if no one acts on it in time, or if the action taken does not reach the person in the water. The smart city can watch its own drowning in high resolution and still fail to prevent it, because the hard part was never the watching. The hard part was the acting, the deciding, the reaching of the individual in time. And that is the part that these systems, for all their sophistication, so often still cannot do, especially in the dark, especially in the minutes a flash flood allows. The cities themselves are part of the problem, because the way modern cities are built almost guarantees that extreme rain becomes a flash flood. Every surface that a city seals under concrete and asphalt is a surface that can no longer absorb rain, so that water, which would once have soaked into soil and grass, now runs straight off into an overwhelmed drainage network, concentrating and rising far faster than it would in open country. The drains beneath these cities were sized for the rainfall of an earlier era, engineered against the storms of the past, and they simply cannot swallow the volumes that the new, more extreme downpours deliver. There have been efforts to fix this, ambitious programs to build so-called sponge cities designed to soak up and hold stormwater rather than shed it, and the idea is sound. But the reality is that retrofitting a vast, already built metropolis to absorb a truly extreme deluge is enormously difficult and slow, and when the great storms come, they routinely overwhelm even the improved defenses. So the city acts as an amplifier, taking a heavy rain and converting it, through all that impervious concrete and undersized drainage, into a fast and violent flood, funneling the water into the streets and the low places with a speed that nature alone would not have produced, and setting the stage for exactly the kind of sudden dark inundation that outruns any warning. And all of this is happening against a backdrop that is making it worse, because the extreme downpours that cause flash floods are growing more intense as the climate warms. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture and can dump it in more concentrated, more violent bursts, which means the very kind of sudden, extreme, localized rainfall that produces urban flash floods is becoming more common and more severe. The storms that drop a month's rain in an hour or a year's rain in a day, the storms that overwhelm any drainage system ever built, are arriving more often. Striking cities whose infrastructure was designed for a gentler climate, whose drains and tunnels and defenses were sized against the storms of the past. So the hazard is intensifying at the same time that the warning systems are failing to keep pace, a widening gap between the growing violence of the floods and the still broken last mile of the warning. Which means that the disaster we are describing, the flash flood swallowing a city in darkness with no effective warning, is not a freak of the past, but a preview of a future in which such events grow more frequent, more severe, and more deadly unless the warning gap is somehow closed. And the darkness does not only trap the victims, it blinds the rescuers, extending the disaster long after the water peaks. Emergency crews trying to reach people in a flooded city at night face the same blackness, the same invisible hazards, the same submerged traps, unable to see who is where or how deep the water runs, forced to work slowly and dangerously through the dark, just when speed means everything. The flood that knocks out the power blinds the whole response, so that the window in which a trapped person might be pulled from a submerging car or a flooding tunnel is not only short but obscured, the rescuers groping toward cries they cannot locate through water they cannot see. This is part of why the tolls climb so high in these events. Because the darkness that ambushes the victims also handicaps the people trying to save them, stretching the time it takes to reach anyone, so that the same failure of light that turned the flood into an ambush turns the rescue into a struggle against the same blindness, and people who might have been saved in daylight are lost in the dark before help can find them. So step back and see the full shape of this horror and understand why it demands attention. A city asleep in the dark. An extreme downpour of the kind that is becoming more common, dropping more water in an hour than the drains can carry in a day. The streets filling with terrifying speed, the water rising not over hours, but over minutes. Pouring into the underpasses and the subways and the basements, the low enclosed places where it kills most efficiently, the power failing, the light dying, the flood becoming invisible, an ambush in the black that surrounds people who cannot see it and cannot see their way out, and the warning, the thing that might have saved them, either never issued with enough force, or never reaching them in time, or never translating into the decisive action that would have kept them out of the traps, so that they meet the water not with the precious minutes of foreknowledge that might have let them escape, but blind and unwarned and alone in the dark. This is not a failure of any single technology. It is a failure of the whole chain that is supposed to connect the sky to the sleeping person, the forecast to the flight, and it is a failure that keeps recurring, disaster after disaster, city after city, because the last and most human link in that chain, the getting of a specific person out of the dark water in time, remains stubbornly, lethally unsolved. The flash flood swallowed the city in complete darkness, and the most damning fact about it is not that the water came, because water will always come. It is that when it did, in the dark, at the moment human beings were most helpless and most in need of a voice telling them to run, there was only silence and the rising, invisible water, and no warning at all.